Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to do our college football DraftKings top picks for you. We have a pretty nice slate of quite a few games. I think there's 11. And some pretty good matchups, as well as some kind of loppy matchups. Some of the crazier matchups are going to be Penn State versus Purdue, Pittsburgh versus West Virginia. And then we got a couple like lopsideds, like Tennessee against Ball State and Oklahoma State against CMU. Uh, Obviously, we expect some of those types of games. Ball State's going to have trouble with Tennessee, and I imagine CMU will have trouble with Oklahoma State. But at any rate, those are kind of the games that are kind of silly, but still have players that we could potentially use. And obviously, in the Penn State Purdue game and Pittsburgh West Virginia game, that's going to be interesting. And we also got some other players from some other teams that are not quite as good, but they can put up points. And are projected to put up some points. So let's go ahead and get into the quarterbacks. So the number one quarterback that I have on my list is Hendon Hooker. Hendon is the returning quarterback for the Tennessee, and he had a really good season last year, almost 3,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. He's by far the best option. Now, you do have to be a little bit concerned that they're going to blow them out, and so he may not play super deep into the game. And if that's the case, that's going to kind of hamper his total points. He still will score a lot of points likely just because of the way their offense runs, but he'll have to do it in a shorter amount of time probably than some of the other quarterbacks on the list. But he's still good for a 25, 35 point game, I would guess. Just it kind of depends on how the game goes. And, as far as the opponent, it's just a kind of an easier opponent. And you can kind of see, oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong guy. You can kind of see in his game log that, on some of these games where they blew out, he didn't quite get as many points as like in games where it was tough, like against Kentucky and Missouri and stuff, where they had a tighter game. But I still expect him to score some points, just maybe not quite as much as his average, but hopefully he can get pretty close, and if you use them, then you'll be happy. Emory Jones is my second quarterback that I've looked at. He's actually a transfer from Florida, and he's going to be at Arizona State. He's still pretty expensive for what he does, considering he throws a lot of interceptions, but I feel like he'll probably be pretty much better there. And he's also got an added bonus that he does run the ball pretty well, and so he can add some points into your scoring from that perspective. And then the next guy that I have is Jake Haener, I guess, for Fresno State. He was named the preseason conference player of the year for his conference. And he was pretty good last year, 4,000 yards, 33 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So we can look for him to have a similar season and has the ability to score points. Against this same team last season, he scored 47.3. And so we can look for something like that again. It doesn't seem, based on his stats, that he really has games where he sits out after a certain amount of time. Like that game was 63-10, and he threw 4 touchdowns. So, and he also seems to not really run the ball though, but it doesn't matter because he should score a decent chunk of points. The next quarterback I've got is Spencer Sander at Oklahoma State. He's not quite as good as some of the guys ahead, but obviously he's a little bit cheaper. But he has been named the preseason first team All Big 12 quarterback. His only real issue is that he doesn't score as many points as some of the guys above him, but he's still pretty good, and he's a pretty solid option if you wanted to pay down a little bit. I have one other guy that's in his price range. That's Brady Cook from Missouri. He didn't play a whole lot, but he is the starter, and Missouri's got a relatively easy opponent. And so hopefully he can come in and, take control of that offense. He's probably a bit weaker than Sanders, but he's still an option in a good position. And he can also run the ball okay. At least that's the plan in Missouri for him. So we will hopefully see some progress out of him. But like I said, he has, he has some ability to run. So he's somebody that's worth taking a look at in that case. I have 4 other quarterbacks we'll look at that are cheaper. These are guys that you could save money at quarterback with and still get some good points with. So my first guy is Sean Clifford. I have to find him here for Penn State. He had a really good season last year. He has some pretty upside as a cheap alternative, and honestly, with his yards and stuff like that, he's in a good position. It is a little bit of a tougher opponent maybe for him. They didn't really play too many games against really tough opponents that weren't where he did super well. But trying to get 20 to 25 points out of this guy at this position in this game, I think that's doable. I mean, he had 20 against Auburn last year, 15 against Wisconsin. So if we can get in that range, we'll probably be okay just because of his price point. And just remember, in college football, this S-Flex option is where you can put a second quarterback. So you could potentially pay up for one quarterback and then put a cheap guy there to, kind of have as a safety valve of like 15 to 20 points. And so any of these bottom four guys are going to be options that you might want to put there. The next guy is Aiden O'Connell for Purdue. He actually has more upside, I think, than Sean Clifford. It just depends on how you think this game's going to go. This game's probably going to be close, and they're both, decent teams sometimes. So you do have to be aware that it's going to be an interesting game. But he doesn't have quite as much upside, like when it comes to like running the ball. But he does have good passing, and he does have tendency for touchdowns. He's still probably in a tougher situation, but he's the second best quarterback in his conference, and he's a pretty cheap option. But if I had to like name two guys I liked more than those two, one of them would be Keelan Slovis for Pittsburgh. He's a transfer from the University of Southern California, where he just threw lots of touchdowns and yards over a couple of seasons. Now he's gonna have a little bit of a new situation and stuff like that, but they have some receivers and stuff that might be beneficial with him. And he's also been named one of the top 10 quarterbacks in college football, potentially at least. And so there's a chance that he could be a really big season for him. And then my last guy, saving the kind of the weirdly best for last, I feel like this is like a perfect option for your S-Flex, and that's JT Daniels. He was at Georgia last season, but he's transferred to West Virginia. Obviously, he played quite a few games for Georgia, and if you can play well as a quarterback in the SEC, which he did pretty decently, you should be able to play in the ACC. And so I kind of like him in the situation. Now, obviously, he had some tough opponents in the SEC, and he had some bad games, but he has some upside, especially in an easier conference with against sub-average team in Pittsburgh. One other thing I will note is that both of these teams are Pittsburgh, especially, is going to throw the ball a lot. So JT Daniels is going to have more. Both of these quarterbacks are going to have more options on the field probably than you would normally have, just because both these teams are kind of ball happy throwing teams. So we should see a lot of throwing between Caden and also JT Daniels playing each other. And so I like both these guys as a cheap option, especially for the S-Flex position. For running back, so your best overall running back is Muhammad Ibrahim. Now, don't get bothered by his stats too much because he got hurt last season, so that's why he only played in one game. However, he was having a great game, and it was against Ohio State. So he's a good running back. It's just a matter of if he can stay healthy. But his price is definitely expensive, but it's, he's got super ability. So we look for him against a bad team. Again, an issue with this guy is that blowout potential. But overall, he's a great running back, so he's somebody you have to consider. Another guy that I have on my list, let's see if I can find him, is Jabari Small from Tennessee. He's the top running back there. He should get some opportunity to score points. He is battling with Jalen Wright at running back as well. But I actually have both of them on the list as players that could potentially be pretty good. Wright has been really good in camp according to the data, and he looks like he's going to have a larger role this season. So look for him as a cheap option at $5,100 that he could score you some points. Then I have another couple guys at $6,000 price range, which is Valladay for Arizona State. He just looks pretty good and he has some potential. He had over 1,000 yards last year, and he looks pretty good for his team. He's not somebody that necessarily gets a crap ton of yards, but he does get some touchdowns here and there, and I think he might be improved this season. So just look for him as an option in a cheaper situation. Another guy is Harrison Whaley for NIU. He also had a pretty decent year with 500 yards and 100 attempts last year. He should get some more of a workload because it looks like he got hurt last season. So he should have a bigger workload this season as their starter. Has a lot of upside and is consistent, and they run the ball a lot from what I can tell. So he looks like a decent option. The other guy in Minnesota, Trey Potts, is an option. Obviously, he only played the first 5 games last season, but when he played, he did really well. And I assume that he got an injury of some sort. They have two really good running backs there in Minnesota, and against a weaker opponent, then they both should have some opportunity to shine. And so look for him as a potential option, maybe a little bit lower option and a cheap option, but he's still in a good position. Kabion Lee from Penn State is a guy that I think is going to have a pretty good game. He has some upside, but he is kind of limited in points just because they don't run the ball as much as you might want. But overall, he should be a decent option in a game like this, and he'll be able to play the whole game. Jalen Wright is the other guy. I actually just mentioned him already. I'm sorry. I have one more guy, Kendall Flowers of South Carolina State. He had 857 yards, 12 touchdowns last season. He looks like a pretty good option as an alternative, and he's pretty inexpensive too. And so while he does have a tougher opponent for his team, he still should be okay, has some upside, and he's a good runner, and he can score touchdowns. And they are going to run the ball, some. So that should be beneficial. So that's what I have at running back. Obviously, early in the season, it's really hard to know how these depth charts are going to play out. But I think those guys are probably the best chances you got to score some pretty good amount of points with the running backs and the teams that are available. And with that said, let's get into the wide receivers. I will also add that it's probably better to use your flex position with a wide receiver. Sometimes I think running back is better, but based on what I've seen so far out of the options and at different positions for this week, I think that the wide receiver is going to be a better place. And so, with that said, let's go ahead and get into the wide receivers themselves. We have Cedric Tillman for Tennessee is obviously the top one, and he's got the best quarterback throwing on the ball, so that's always a benefit. Now I have another guy at Tennessee that I want to mention, and this is Brew McCoy, and he just got his eligibility waiver approved, and he's transferring from Southern California. Now he had a really rough situation because he did some bad things at USC, but he was a 5-star wide receiver coming out of high school, and so he has a lot of upside from that perspective, and so he's somebody we have to look at as an option. And he's $4,000, and I think he's going to have an opportunity to thrive in the offense because they've missed out on a couple wide receivers that they had last season. Sorry about moving the thing. I didn't realize it was doing that. The next one is Jalen Cooper. This guy is at Fresno State, and he's got a really good matchup in a game where they could score some points, and he scored a lot of points last season, and I expect him to have a pretty solid game against a weaker opponent. And so let's look for that. He had 24 points last season in the same opponent. The next guy that I like quite a bit is A.T. Perry for Wake Forest against BMI. He had 1,200 yards, averaged 22 points a game, and he had a really solid season last season, and I expect he will improve on that. And he also has a average quarterback throwing the ball. I was gonna say above average, but he's really kind of just average. But anyway, he's the guy that's gonna get most of the scoring on that team at wide receiver. Ryan O'Keefe is another guy I like for UCF. Now he's a little bit more hit and miss, but he's still a pretty solid option. He's a little expensive, but he is, like I say, he's inconsistent, but he's got some high upside games, and this is the type of game where he has the opportunity to have high upside. Then we have Kanata Mumpfield from Pittsburgh. That's a kind of a cool name. This guy has some really good upside for Pittsburgh, especially with a good quarterback, and he already had been good last year, most of the season, and so I look for him to build on it. We have one other player at Pittsburgh too, and Jared Wayne. So where'd he go? Jared. He looks like he's poised to have a breakout season as well. Again, they have some new, quarterbacks, so they're gonna have some advantage. Here, he had some good games last year, but he didn't get a lot of touches, and I kind of look for him to get more touches in this game. And then I have Parker Washington for Penn State. He seems like probably the best option at Penn State, and he had some pretty good season last year. Doesn't quite have the upside as you would like, maybe, but he's cheap enough that you can pay down for him and have touchdown potential with him. From what I read, the coaches really like him in the red zone, and so does his quarterback in the preseason. The other guy from Penn State is Michael Tinsley. He had a really good season last year, and it looks like he's going to be sharing the ball with Parker Washington, excuse me. And I look like both those guys are going to be solid options, and they're pretty inexpensive at wide receiver. Then I have Bryce Ford Wheaton for West Virginia. Another guy that's just got a new quarterback that's going to help him become a better player. He had some sneaky upside last year, but he wasn't heavily involved in the offense. Being that he's probably the top wide receiver for West Virginia, he definitely has some upside now. And then John Paul Richardson, kind of a little under the radar pick. Looks like he's going to be one of the better receivers for them, even though he didn't get a ton of chances last season. I don't know why that thing keeps moving. I usually have the problem. Sorry about that, guys. But he might get you in the 15 to 20 range in points if he can stay on the field for most of the game, which is definitely possible. And so he's just an option, and he's $3,000, so he's minimum price. He's kind of a Hail Mary, but he might have the opportunity to score you a decent amount of points. I have two more guys on the list. One of them is Dallas Dixon. He had a pretty good season last season, and he is against a tough opponent for his team, but he has some upside, and if they can get him the ball, then he might score a decent chunk of points. Obviously, the opponent is going to make it a little bit harder, but I still like him in this matchup, even so. And then the final guy is Bub Means for Pittsburgh. He has some upside, even though he's like the third string guy. He is going to be on the field a lot. They're going to try to get him the ball. As you can see, that last year he had a couple games where he did pretty good. So he definitely has some upside, and they're looking to see if they can add on to that. And this game should be kind of a throwing the ball kind of game. And so if you want to save a lot of money, he's only $3,900, and he can definitely save you some money. So that's pretty much what I have. I hope that you like this video. If you feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video with anybody else that plays. And thanks, and have a nice day, guys.